crime when really the motivation was another one. Take, for example, Al Capone, the gangster, out in Chicago. So he's prosecuted for tax evasion, but the gripe was he's committing murder out there against other gangsters.
Right.
So, yeah, and no one said at that time, hey, he should be out of prison. He didn't even to the mother. And that's just the way that the legal system works. You know, you may have objections to it, but that is not unusual. Now, I do think, at least at present, the element that's unusual here is not that the lies that were made in terms of making representations to potential lenders, values that were clearly absurd, but at least none of those who were purportedly victims, if you will, deceived by the inflated value, has come and complained and said, hey, we lost money.
Hi, everybody. I'm about to go live with Political Misfits, John Kiriakou and Michelle Whitty. It's going to start probably in about 5 to 10 minutes. So stay tuned.
Trump has already stated that his inflations were just sent out of there. He stated under oath, well, you know, what's the value of my properties? It depends upon how I feel in the morning. My brand is, you know, can be 5 billion more than it was yesterday if I feel like smiling. So, I mean, this guy is completely in fantasy land when it comes to law. So that's what we have. Now, with regard, I think, politically, what about politically? I think that the greatest danger that Trump is politically with the current civil fraud is if the revelations show that this is not some genius entrepreneur who made any money. Right. He really is not all that rich. Most of the money they got was inherited. And it kind of reduces any kind of suggestion that he's some kind of brilliant entrepreneur and deserving of some admiration as it is. But even then, I don't want to overstate even how much that damage is to his political brand. Because remember, his political brand is based on delusion. It's based upon a cult who doesn't care anything. Literally what he said. If he went out on Times Square and committed murder, they'd still be in support of him. I don't think it's majority. But these people are unhinged, to be candid. They're the people who believe, China was able to manipulate voting machines by lasers and do set forest fires ablaze in California. I mean, it's truly amazing. So they're not going to walk away from Trump because their whole life is bound up in believing in this fantasy land, because that's what gives them, I guess, some hope that maybe they can walk in his footsteps and be powerful and enjoy riches as well. So, but I do think that on the whole, that Trump's greatest political detriment will be, all right, now you're fraud. You don't really have all this money.
Right.
I think he can probably still get money from benefactors who just throw in and make them rich again. But then his pride is really punctured, because even he has to think that he got more than just inheritance to make him rich. That's part of his self-esteem. And I think he's going to lose that if the proof, which is now underway, shows that he really isn't all that valuable, other than his own self-serving statements. Oh, my brand is worth whatever I say. I want it.
Right. There's a Supreme Court case that I wanted to ask you about too. I think it's fascinating. It involves the Americans with Disabilities Act. A woman named Deborah Lawford has been suing hotels around the country for not putting information on their websites about handicapped access, which is mandated by the ADA. She's been doing this even if she doesn't have any intention of actually spending the night in the hotel. Now, a couple of times she's made a reservation. The hotel was not ADA compliant, and she slept in her car because she couldn't physically get into the hotel. But the situation the case is based on is this. She sued a hotel in Maine, even though she didn't intend to spend the night there. She sued them just because they didn't have the information on their website. They argue that because she didn't intend to sleep there, she doesn't have standing to sue. And that's the issue before the court. If the court agrees with the hotel, it would weaken, some people say severely, the Americans with Disabilities Act. So give us your thoughts on this case, which some are comparing to the major civil rights cases of the 1960s. Who do you think has the stronger argument?
I think it's a close question. A similar kind of case was decided, many decades ago by the Supreme Court when it came to trying to enforce the civil rights laws against discrimination in housing. When their investors that would go out and they would visit real estate agents and ask, okay, is this property available? Is that property available? And they had black as well as white testers, and they'd say, hey, they wouldn't show certain homes to the black testers, but they would to the white testers in order to show that there was discrimination. In that case, the court held that there was standing to sue under the Civil Rights Act against housing discrimination. But the court has not been uniform on that score. I mean, the basic idea that the court has promulgated under the doctrine of so-called standing is that you have to have an actual or threatened concrete injury before you can have standing to sue. And Congress can't even make up and give further injury. I mean, make up injuries or just kind of create private attorney generals to go around look for law violations, even if there's no immediate victim. Now here, I mean, it seems to me that well, even if I don't, once I was able to.
Hey, Guy, is that
Yes, it's all good, thanks.
Go in and they're not compliant with the accommodations that the ADA requires. But we just aren't going to permit Don Quixote types to go out there and enforce the law when no one actually has been hurt. I think it's unfortunate. Obviously, this is not something that requires an enormous amount of expense to just identify. Okay, this is the handicap facility that we have. So if we want to have, I think, competition fairly among all these facilities, they all ought to be playing by the same rules, and whoever is doing and they're in violation should have to pay up.
Bruce Fine, thank you so much for joining us. Bruce is a former Associate Deputy Attorney General of the United States and one of the country's leading constitutional scholars. You can find his work at www.brucefine.com or no, .substack.com. Although you can also go to brucefine.com. That's his website. Should we take a break? Yeah, we're going to take a break. Okay. We didn't take any breaks yesterday.
No, exactly.
We're going to do that right now. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're going to take that break and come right back. Stay tuned.
Politics and culture. Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the random juice spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily. Local fix. Surrender.
You understand?
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Whitty. I'm here with John Kiriakou. We're talking about salt. For the past few days, I've seen reports that salt water is creeping into the Mississippi, pushing farther north than it usually is able to do because the Mississippi freshwater levels are so low. This could become a serious problem. And sometimes when you talk about these phenomena, they could become serious problems in a year or in 5 years or in, 10 years. But no, projects or projections by the Army Corps of Engineers suggest that saltwater could reach water intake facilities in southeastern Louisiana towns by October 14th. Before the end of the month, New Orleans water supplies could be affected. There are already places in the state where people are relying on bottled water to drink. Now, as the Army Corps of Engineers presents these projections, it also says the intrusion of saltwater upstream in the Mississippi River is a naturally occurring periodic condition. So we're going to talk about whether this is much ado about nothing, whether this is a normal iteration of this periodic condition, or whether we should see something more here. We are joined by Guy McPherson. He's Professor Emeritus of Natural Resources and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Arizona. He's also got a PhD minor in agricultural economics. Thanks for joining us, Guy.
Thank you, Michelle and Jones. Pleasure to chat with you again.
Welcome back.
So talk to us about what is happening along the Mississippi in Louisiana, and whether we should see this as part of normal cycles or not.
This is hardly normal. The intrusion of salt water from the Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi River does happen periodically. However, we're in the midst of a serious drought, the likes of which we haven't seen on this continent for more than 1,000 years. Unfortunately, the water treatment plants in southeastern Louisiana do not have the equipment necessary to desalinate the seawater. And so some people are claiming bottled water is the solution. And in that case, as usual, it'll be a billionaire or two who benefits from using bottled water. In addition, it takes a lot of bottled water to wash the dishes and the laundry, never mind to take an occasional bath. Now, you mentioned infrastructure and agriculture. Salt water is corrosive, so it will damage the pipes. How soon and how badly depend upon how long the contamination continues. Perhaps most importantly, with respect to agriculture, is that the Mississippi River is fundamental to agriculture in this entire country. Not only does the river provide the requisite water, but the Mississippi is critical to transporting grains to the world. Without the ability to grow, store, and transport grains, this set of living arrangements disappears. And that's what we're talking about here in the worst case scenario, is the inability not only to put water on the grains grown in the Midwestern part of the United States, but also to transport them. So this is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, okay, sure, if we're just talking about drinking water and it's super short term, you can buy bottled water, and as you say, a couple of billionaires are going to profit. But it feels like a much bigger problem. It was interesting to me that there's a physical underwater barrier down near the mouth of the Mississippi that was built with the intention of preventing salt water from flowing into the river. And the Army Corps of Engineers, as part of its approach to this problem, is going to try and elevate it. But I mean, one, they say even this new threshold is soon going to be breached. And again, it doesn't feel like, I mean, yeah, okay, sure. Build a wall to keep the sea from coming in is a short-term solution. Is there something else that we should be attempting here?
Well, I hate to say these words, but maybe we could use less. Oh, wait, this is America.
Oh,
Conservation is clearly out of fashion. Never mind the 7-generation approach used by the Iroquois Confederation. We are encouraged by politicians to consume, and then consume some more. And to turn that around, to suddenly try to convince the populace in this country that consuming is out of fashion, when that's all we've ever been encouraged to do, I'm not sure that's going to go anywhere. In addition, you know, if we talk about preventing serious problems in the future, that's going to require some vision. Do I need to say more about that? Vision?
I
in
mean,
this country?
no. I guess the way to talk about this is, I feel like, to maybe keep it, I feel like it's easier to get your head around some of these things if we make them very specific. So I wonder, I mean, you of course talked about what happens if and as this salt water creeps up the Mississippi. We're talking, of course, not only about the loss of drinking water, but about corrosion in pipes, about the inability to use this water for agriculture, about the inability to use this river as a mechanism for transportation. Could also talk about salt corrosion, meaning everything that we use in that salt water has to be replaced faster. But to try and make this comprehensible, I wonder if you could just talk about what happens if the single city of New Orleans loses the Mississippi as a water source.
Okay, so the New Orleans metropolitan area is a little over 1 million people. So you could argue that it's only 1 million people out of 320 million in this country. And so maybe we can take measures to ship water to them in big trucks or whatever. But what about the tourism business that supports the city and the state? Are we going to let that dry up? So we're just talking about not only 1 million people. It's a problem for all of Louisiana. It's a problem for all of the country. In fact, let's talk about the Mississippi River for a minute. The Mississippi River is where we transport all the grains produced in this country, right? So, whereas cyclical droughts are relatively common along the Mississippi River and throughout the world, that's not what we're talking about here. The worst ever previous drought in this area occurred in the late 1500s. The ongoing drought has already exceeded the one from the 1500s. The last 23 years are the driest in 1,200 years. We have no idea when this is going to stop. And what are we going to do in the meantime? It's the ability to transport those grains from the United States to the world that maintains this set of living arrangements. I've said dozens of times that this set of living arrangements depends upon the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. And without the Mississippi River, we're in real trouble, not just in this country, but in the world.
You joked about vision earlier, but I do have to ask, the White House has declared this saltwater intrusion a federal emergency, which is going to free up funding for relief efforts. But again, we are talking about, it feels like we're in a cycle of constantly relieving and never really addressing, right? And so I wonder if you see anything in the response to what's going on along the Mississippi River that goes beyond just immediate relief to attempting to prevent the problem. I know you've said we have not heard Joe Biden come out and talk to us about how we need to consume less water. Maybe there are other things that he could be doing that he's not.
One of the downsides of disaster capitalism is that when you have a disaster, there's no legitimate response. And that's where we are. Yeah. Much of the state of Florida is at or slightly above sea level. And as a result, Florida represents the bellwether in this sort of situation. Southern Florida is plagued with cases of saltwater intrusion into the freshwater, and it's costing a huge amount of money to clean up that problem so that Florida can deliver potable water through the taps. Other states are affected too, including much of the coastal area in the deep south. Aquaculture is being impacted in Maine. Coastal forests throughout the northeastern United States are threatened. Tidal flooding is on the rise as a result of abrupt climate change, with negative effects throughout coastal areas in the entire country. And all that aside, let's think about the long-term implications for Louisiana and for the country. I don't know about you, but I thought access to potable water was the primary promise made by politicians to the citizenry of every reasonably developed country. Food is item two, but to even imagine our drinking water being contaminated beyond the point of being potable is an absolute nightmare, isn't it? I mean, we're supposed to be the greatest country in the history of the planet, and we're talking about the inability to get water to people? This is insane.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, again, we have the Army Corps of Engineers saying, oh, don't worry, this happens every year, guys. It's just happening a little bit more intensely right now. But if, as you say, this is the worst drought that we have experienced in the last 1,200 years, why doesn't that play more of a role in some of the reporting on this? Like the fact that, yes, it just feels like people haven't quite figured out how to report on, yes, this is a thing that has always happened, but the extremity of it is what's different.
Yeah, one of the things that's different is that it's not a Mississippi drought, it's a continental drought. This drought has already affected every state in the continental United States except Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine. There's no end in sight. This is one of the results of abrupt, irreversible climate change. According to a report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published on October 8th, 2018, quote, even geophysical events do not approach current rates of human-driven change, end quote. In other words, anthropogenic climate change is occurring faster than when an asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula about 66 million years ago. That mass extinction event caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other species. And we're talking about something caused by the collective mass of humanity that's worse than that. How do we deal with that? We've never been here. I don't know how to deal with it. You know, we could ask people to stop consuming, but I don't think that's going to happen in this country or throughout the entire first world. I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. I'm like I've spent so much of my time in my life, I'm at a complete loss.
Well, at least we're all in company. So when you say like continent wide, do you think, I mean, maybe step one is when people are reporting on the drought in the Mississippi River, you know, do you think that this should be explicitly connected to the ongoing water crisis in the Colorado River and the groundwater depletion that is just starting to get some reporting? Because I see these consistently reported on as discrete events, right? There's this drought in the West. There's this thing happening in the Mississippi that's a little bit weird, but getting less attention. And then there's this sort of groundwater issue that's just starting to get attention. And is this what you mean by like, we should see this as a continent-wide drought, not there's one drought happening in the West, there's one drought happening in the East, there's one different thing to do with water happening over the whole country, and let's all keep talking about them in our sort of separate specialized areas.
Right, absolutely, because this is a large-scale phenomenon that we're dealing with at this point. This is not a little bit here and a little bit there. This is, at this point, this is everywhere. This is worldwide, the disasters. I mean, take a look at the news every day. Every place that it's not flooding, there's a drought. Every place that there's not a drought, it's feast or famine. And we have never had to deal with this before, so we didn't build the infrastructure to deal with it. Right? I mean, we built infrastructure for the 100-year flood, and now we have a 1,000-year flood every 6 or 8 days. It's insane. And so we're not set up for it. We didn't build the infrastructure for what is currently happening. And I don't see us having the vision or the time to redevelop the infrastructure for the even the long term, much less the short term. We got so many people consuming so much of everything on this planet that it seems like to me that it's a little late for turning the ship around. The ship already struck the iceberg and it's going down.
Yeah, I don't suppose it's even worth asking where we are in terms of desalinization. Salinization, is that it? Desalinization technology?
Yeah, it requires an enormous amount of energy to desalinate water. And not only that, but you're left with a huge mass of not just salt, but salt infused with heavy metals that are incredibly toxic. So it takes an enormous amount of energy. It seems that we passed the peak for all energy extraction in the world 2 or 3 years ago. So the cost of fossil fuel is going to keep going up, and we're going to use that fossil fuel to fix this problem in time for the next problem, and then in time for the next problem.
I mean,
it's a mess.
It does sound like kind of a familiar pattern. I'd like to not repeat it, but you know, you ask it as though that's unthinkable, and I would say maybe not. You know, I mean, isn't that? Oh God, John, we were just talking about this as I can't remember what it was now, but you know, burning more fuel to get the water out there. I think it was with fracking. We're talking about fracking and water use with fracking. Yeah, how we're going to use more and more water to frack the oil that is causing our water to become ever more sort of depleted and unusable. Yes, great, perfect. Yeah.
Right, and so that's what we've been doing.
Please. Yeah.
Right, that's what we've been doing, is switching from one catastrophe to another and trying to overcome it by throwing everything we got at it, and then the day after tomorrow it comes along again. But there's no vision here. This is just responding to emergencies.
Yeah, and I mean, who know, it's difficult to predict a timeline for these events, but I think that I don't see a lot of evidence that we are doing anything other than, as you say, Guy, responding to emergencies. Well, I mean, that was that was what I expected, but it did seem like we should probably talk about it. Guy McPherson, I really appreciate you joining us. You want to tell our listeners where they can go to find your work?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat again. I really appreciate it. You can find all my work at guymcpherson.com.
Thanks so much, Guy. I was going to wish you a good weekend, but go ahead, have a really good long weekend.
Thank you, and you too.
We'd have a couple minutes left, and then we're going to go talk about more domestic news. I forgot to mention we have this big strike, biggest healthcare strike in U.S. history, starting today.
Something like
75,000 Kaiser Permanente workers walking out. I'm going to ask our next guest also to explain to me that Kaiser Permanente is a nonprofit.
Well, wasn't that something? Thanks everybody for tuning in. Sorry for the absence of notice, but this came upon us relatively quickly. As usual with Political Misfits, I found out early this morning, they sent me some of the topics and a couple of questions they were going to ask. So I spent all morning getting ready for this interview. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. We appreciate it as always. Have a great day.
Where is it?